Hi, I'm Ellen Anderson, and this is my service learning presentation. I chose to work with the Richmond Metropolitan Habitat for Humanity. There are several ways that volunteers can help Habitat. They can volunteer at the Habitat Restore, assist in the construction of Habitat partner family homes, or help with the organization of fundraising events. I chose to volunteer at a build site. Habitat is focused on assuring everyone has access to safe, decent, affordable shelter and quality community services. Habitat helps families build and buy affordable homes with volunteer labor and family labor. Habitat calls sweat equity. Habitat helps older adults with modifications and repairs required to age in place. It also helps disabled persons to modify or build Americans with Disabilities Act or ADA compliant homes. Habitat provides disaster relief aid, offers financial education, directs community revitalization programs, and offers non-predatory mortgage financing with affordable income based on monthly sliding payments capped at 30% of monthly income. Habitat pursues social justice through serving people in need of decent housing. The promotion of equity lies at the heart of their mission. Home ownership is a powerful tool in promoting racial equity, building generational wealth, and building an equitable and just society. Occupational justice is an outgrowth of social justice that focuses on people's unique occupational needs and rights. Habitat seeks to reduce the injustice of occupational deprivation, or the state of preclusion from engagement in occupations of necessity and/or meaning due to factors that stand outside the immediate control of the individual. The first day I volunteered with Habitat, I worked on these tasks. The first concepts I want to discuss are communication strategies and therapeutic use of self. Before even arriving at the build, I unconsciously began using the steps of interpersonal reasoning. Ahead of time, I anticipated the interpersonal challenges of showing up to a construction build with minimal construction knowledge. I also realized I may not see many other women on the build. When I showed up, the guys seemed fairly surprised to see me. One volunteer named Mike asked, "So what brought you here today? Were you just curious?" I identified that they may not see me as a serious worker because of my appearance and gender, or their response to human diversity, and coped by reminding myself not to take it personally. I determined it would be necessary to shift modes in order to gain the other volunteers' confidence that I was there to work hard, learn, and be useful. I chose to adopt an alternatingly encouraging and collaborative therapeutic mode and utilized interpersonal skills such as communication and rapport building as required. Most of them were parents, so I used that, their jobs, and favorite sports teams as a basis to get them talking and comfortable interacting with me. I achieved this pretty quickly through joking conversation, asking questions, and answering theirs. Once I got them laughing, we got to work. The crew consisted of 5 men and 2 women: Mike, Mark, Stephen, Ryan, the habitat supervisor, Eva, and myself. I gathered nonverbal and indirect verbal feedback throughout the volunteer experience to assess mode change necessity and interpersonal skill application as required. Day one went smoothly. It was easy and enjoyable interpersonally and much. The other female volunteer, Eva Fountain, arrived 30 minutes late because she got lost. Eva and I instantly bonded. We had a lot in common. Throughout the build, we kept up a good conversation and the guys chimed in with their personal stories on occasion. I learned a lot about her through active listening and asking clarifying questions with genuine empathetic curiosity. Eva contracted COVID at the beginning of the pandemic. She was placed on a ventilator. Her hospital stay was 4 months. 2 years later, she is still recovering, and PTOT played a major role in her recovery. She faced severe cognitive difficulties and weakness due to muscle atrophy that impacted her ability to do anything independently. In hospital, she focused on ADLs and cognition. She did a lot of what she describes as electronic puzzles, though she had to put things in order. She found it extremely frustrating to go through the process of cognitive rescaffolding. Eva chose to retire due to cognitive difficulties that are still impacting her today. She mentioned executive functioning and working memory in particular. I thanked her for sharing some of her experiences with OT and her convalescence. I also offered Eva empathetic information feedback as appropriate throughout our conversation. The next concept I want to discuss is teaching principles. I learned a lot from the more experienced volunteers. Before day one on the build, I knew how to measure, use a circular saw, as well as a Russian YouTube handyman can teach via video, but very little on exterior house construction. Though it was informal, they basically followed the steps of the teaching and learning process. Assessment of learner in need, the more experienced volunteers discussed with Eva and I how much we knew about the day's work. Design instruction, they considered which skills we would need to learn. Teaching instruction, they took turns taking the time to demonstrate new skills and supervised several of our first solo attempts. Feedback and evaluation. Based upon our performance, the more experienced volunteers gave us tips on how we can improve, encouragement, and safety warnings. Thanks to their willingness to teach, I was much more useful on the building site, especially on day 2. On day 2, volunteering with Habitat, I focused on the following tasks. On day 2, a member of the partner family was there to help with construction. His name is Alexander. He is a single father of 3. We got to talking about our kids a little bit while moving siding from the front of the house to the back. His oldest child is 20 and has cystic fibrosis, and his younger children are in high school. Social justice. Following decades of legalized discrimination in the housing industry, which resulted in today's racially disparate housing market, helping Alexander to access affordable homeownership is working towards social justice. Additionally, Alexander's finished home will be ADA compliant, where less than 1% of housing is accessible for wheelchair users. Occupational justice. Alexander and his family have been struggling through occupational imbalance. Alexander's low income, single parenthood, and caretaker status for his disabled son has his family trapped in a cycle of paying high rent for non-ADA compliant apartments. Habitat involvement will help him and his children lead more occupationally balanced lives. The next concept I want to briefly touch upon is conflict management. I am going to describe an uncomfortable experience I had with Mike, another volunteer, on day 2. I arrived at 8 a.m. to start day 2 on the build, excited to learn. The same Habitat for Humanity employee in charge of the build was there, and so was one of the volunteers, Mike. There were about 9 men total present, plus me. We split into groups, all working in the same area. Mike, Dan, and I worked on putting up siding. Mike, who is Bostonian, bossy, and gruff, took charge of our group as he had the most experience. He picked on everyone, but a lot of it was focused on me, likely because I was youngest and the only woman. He did this on day 1 as well, and I considered it to be harmless fun and dished it back to him. We worked for several hours, made a lot of progress, and I learned a lot this time as well. It was interesting work. Following one exchange, Mike put both of his hands loosely around my neck from behind and mock choked me while I was holding a nail gun and preparing to use it on a siding board. He didn't apply pressure, and it lasted about 2 seconds. Several of the other volunteers directly witnessed it, and nobody said anything. I just froze for a moment in shock, then kept working, trying to figure out how I felt. My feelings on the matter followed that moment ranged from shock to ambiguously uncomfortable. However, I logically understand it was an extremely inappropriate occurrence. The other volunteers' lack of reaction served to reinforce my confusion. Shortly thereafter, a thunderstorm rolled in, so we all began scrambling to pack up the worksite before the rain hit. In the end, in the chaos before it rained, I did not address the issue. I resent the confusion and intrusion of the experience and the impact it has on my desire to return to volunteer with Richmond's Habitat in future. I do not think passive acceptance is the proper way to approach this kind of issue in future. I was wholly unprepared for the incident, and it has given me a lot to think about in terms of how I would like to handle similar issues should they arise. I'm interested to hear from anyone who listens to this experience how they would have chosen to handle it in a volunteer context versus an employment context. The last concept I want to discuss is the potential programs that could be developed by occupational therapists in conjunction with Habitat. Here are a few I brainstormed. A community center OT could collaborate with Habitat to develop a job skills program. In exchange for sweat equity, clients could be mentored by select Habitat volunteers in areas like professional communication, specific construction skills training, or construction safety training. The community center OT or OTA could then work with their client on marketing or expanding their skill set. Another idea I came up with is establishing a sweat equity for communal home living membership model for semi-independent living for persons with disabilities. A community or school-based OT could assess good candidates for the program and help them to apply. Habitat could hire an OT to facilitate resident therapeutic programs for independent living, safety assessment, responsibilities with Habitat, and volunteer mentor coordination. I also think that OT could help Habitat in its existing functions on a consultancy basis or a volunteer basis. In summary, my experience was overall positive. Day one was an informative learning experience that got me excited about the impact of OT. It was also a chance to practice communication strategies and therapeutic use of self. Day two was complex, considering the experience with Mike that I'm still digesting. It was unexpectedly stressful and uncomfortable, but it was another informative learning experience. Professionally, I benefited from practicing my therapeutic use of self and communication skills. I also benefited from the challenge presented by Mike's behavior. It's not the first and won't be the last challenge I face with inappropriate behavior. I do not have to return as a volunteer, though I really did enjoy so many of the aspects of volunteering. However, I will have to return to work following potentially similar situations, and this has been a good opportunity to brainstorm better approaches to handling those situations in the future. I, like Habitat, believe everyone deserves a safe, decent, and affordable home. In volunteering with Habitat for Humanity, I believe that I played a small part in helping to physically construct a home for Alexander and his family. In doing so, I also played a small role in helping ensure that Alexander and his family can experience a more occupationally balanced and socially just world. I think the building site I worked on is working to meet the occupational needs of Alexander and his family. The injustice of the housing market in America in general and the means of accessing funding are appalling. People should not have to endure occupational imbalance working often or so many jobs to afford their mortgage or rent that they have little opportunity to engage meaningfully with their family or promote their own health or well-being. Assuming a mortgage is accessible and fair to them or renting is affordable for them at all. Habitat works to give low-income individuals access to housing stability with an affordable and fair mortgage so that they have a much better opportunity for achieving a healthy occupational balance in their lives and their families' lives. I believe that occupational therapy's coordination with Habitat, as discussed previously, could further the mission of equity and social justice that Habitat works toward in invaluable creative ways. I would love to see some of the applications I brainstormed happen in the future. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope it was interesting and helpful to you.